Yeah, I can hear myself even. So Andreas missed a bit out that I was a CTO of Symbian for 6 years, and then Nokia bought Symbian. And so I had 2 years in Nokia, which was really interesting, going from being their supplier to being inside of Nokia. And then I left Nokia to go to TomTom. Okay, so yeah. I'm really pleased to be here and to talk about architecture. So the purpose of my talk is it's based on my experience at TomTom. All right, at TomTom I am executive sponsor, I think, of architecture as a discipline in TomTom, and have been pushing for it ever since I was in TomTom. I joined TomTom 7 years ago, just over. And what I'm talking about today is based on that experience. And the experience is that when I joined TomTom, architecture was not a strong discipline, and it still needs to be strengthened further, without doubt. And there are many people, some people from TomTom from the audience who know that. And but one thing that Harold said to me recently was, in a kind of aside after a meeting. Harold is our CEO. He said, you know, before you joined, I didn't really know that architecture existed as something to worry about. And I now know it exists and realize its importance. And I thought, that's a win, right? And that's and I wonder in your organizations how much at the top, whether that's partly the case. And that was software architecture in this case. The message in my talk is that if you want to, well, look, we all believe, but so bang for buck means the same as return on investment. It costs money to do architecture. And you want to get a return on that investment, which is, as people know me, I like to use the term bang per buck for return on investment. And I think we all believe you get return on investment from architecture, but to really achieve that in an organization, you've got to get other people in the organization to believe that, especially the politically powerful people in the organization. And there's nobody more politically powerful than the CEO of an organization, right? And to get them to do that requires persuasion and influencing skills and certain competencies. And I, throughout my career, have developed worked on and continue to work on those competencies. And so the heart of my talk is to explain what I think those competencies, what the competencies I work on and which I'd recommend you work on. And that's really, I can stop now and go away, but I'll do the talk. But I'm going to start with giving you an overview of TomTom because you probably, it's a short update, so the first 10 minutes is just about TomTom, and then I'll go into the central argument of getting bang per buck from architecture by persuading your organization that architecture delivers great bang per buck. So, and you can ask questions if you want. I mean, it's kind of, but I aim to go for 30 minutes and then that should allow for 10 to 15 at the end. So, TomTom today is different from TomTom. TomTom grew, as most of you know, as a sat-nav company, as a consumer sat-nav company, as an aftermarket sat-nav company. And it grew to a very large size very quickly, very successfully, and led the market in that growth. And has since diversified into sports watches, which I wear. But from the early days of that growth, there was some diversification into other things. Telematics is probably not well known, but we're the leading telematics supplier or operational fleet management solution supplier in Europe. It's a fragmented market, and but we have the biggest share of that market. And it's been a steady growing business for some time, all right? And it's not well known. If you see a van, it's quite likely, if you see a white van, it's quite likely a TomTom box under the bonnet and someone looking at where that van is doing that. And so it's a business to business kind of business, right? Then the heart of TomTom today is really that what we've done over the years is take the technologies that made that we used to do a PND, the components, componentize them, and we now reassemble them and provide them for automotive customers and for other customers. And we call that externally this. If you look at our annual report from 2016, you'll see this kind of 3 columns with a bit more words in it. But there we provide maps, and at the top thing I'm showing our newest map, which is a high, and what we call an HD map, which is for autonomous driving or automated driving, so traffic and navigation software. So maps, traffic, and navigation software. It's not the only things, but it's the kind of 3 core things, and that's really the heart of what TomTom is. We spend a fortune on R&D, very much higher than most companies. If we look at now in cash terms, we turned over in 2016 close to $1 billion, 27% on cash R&D. That's a massive R&D spend, and nearly all of that is on software development. Our products are insanely complex, some of them, very difficult to describe, highly interdependent. There's a complex product architecture, but all the products, whether they're hardware or software, whether they're online services, whether they're software libraries, whether they're data, all our products are software intensive. The maps are software intensive because the systems we need to maintain those maps are software intensive, and we spend a fortune on that. So we do an awful lot of software. This is my attempt at a bit of business architecture. I'm aware that not everybody in the audience is a software architect, and I'm really a software architect in background and kind of history. I was probably once what you would call a coding architect. I don't code anymore, but many of you recognize the UML class diagram, which is showing the core of our business. So we sell navigation technologies to business customers, where navigation technologies includes maps, traffic, and software. Well, here I've said that there are types, subclasses of maps, APIs, and software. And the business customers are either automotive or not automotive customers, roughly speaking, which we call enterprise. And Apple is included, so if you have an iPhone, it's our map and it's our traffic in that iPhone. And we've recently done a deal with Microsoft that's quite important for their Azure platform. And we sell to very many, I haven't put all of them, but we sell either some combination of maps traffic to automotives. So this is the core of where we make money, where we're growing at the moment, is in automotive, and it's our traditional business. Going from providing P&Ds, we got into the automotive market a long time ago by doing a landmark deal with Renault, and since then that's grown into quite a Wurlitzer, where we try and win deals and provide automotive applications. Well, navigation in a vehicle, but the navigation isn't the only application in a vehicle that needs a map or needs a navigation technology, and our newer automotive business goes all the way to driver assistance through to automated driving. And in the beginning of this year, we acquired a small company in Berlin that has an application. It's not an app, it's an application that does automated driving. All right, and this picture here, this video, there's a short video from that unit. So let me figure out how to play this. I think I just click on here. Nope. I need some. Oh, I see. I think I can just click on the slide. Yeah. That's it. There it goes. So this is a video from that unit, and it's what it's doing is what happens in an automated car is a robot on wheels, and it has sensors and it has a map. And one of the key sensors is just the video, and it's showing the video, and it's doing computer vision. It's recognizing, it's doing perception, it's recognizing traffic signs, and all of this is pretty advanced stuff. And it's relating that and positioning itself, what we call localization, into the map. And we hope in the end to make money providing a map subsystem in an automated driving system. And so that's what we're doing. And you see all the kind of blurry things are other cars in the road that it's building what we call an environmental model. But this is, you wouldn't have this in the car, but this is kind of looking at it to try and illustrate that the car is building an environmental model and knows its position in that environmental model. That environmental model involves a map and sensor computer vision, essentially, from the sensors. So it's pretty advanced stuff we're doing these days. We not only do a lot of software, we do pretty much advanced software. It includes big data we've been doing for a long time for traffic, for example. It involves advanced analytics techniques to produce that progress, both in batch analytics and real-time analytics. We do machine learning. We do GPU-based machine learning as well. And this is just a quick illustration of the type of thing we do in map making. We have professional MoMA vans that are doing high-quality images of traffic, of road signs, and we have labeled using humans very large data sets, sample sets of those, and we use those sample sets to train a neural net, which is represented by the thing, convolutional neural net, and then we try and do it automated. So pretty, even in map making, there's an awful lot going on. So that's a kind of flavor of where, it's kind of how TomTom has evolved and where it sees its future in, very much in applications for customers, business customers, for its what we now call navigation technologies. And if I took at the overall company, software development is so important that we've been running since 2013, something we call world-class software development. And that is, the idea behind that is that if you want to be, whatever strategy we follow, and the strategy evolves, with so much software in our products, being better at software development will make us better. And we've been doing that since 2013. We started with quality. We went and improved our act in the way we do Scrum, and we've improved things like product management. But very much hot topic, and why I was so keen to speak to you is that we've been pushing architecture as a software architecture in this case, as something that will help us get more bang for buck. And the way we look at it in terms of, we have a manifesto, the way we look at it, and we try to break it down to people, practices, and software. So we need people who understand we need architects, and we need people also who appreciate what architecture is, including the CEO, right? And we need people who practice greater professionalism in architecture. And then we follow our practices. I'm ashamed to say, we don't have an architecture description for every system we have, by any means. We have some systems where you can't say who the architect is. And so we're working hard to improve this. And we also look at it in terms of the software, where some software needs re-architecting or replacing. I've heard the term before, design dead, which I like. You can have a piece of software that's design dead, which means it's dead. Bury it and replace it with another piece of software. So so very much I'm part of this, and some of the people in the audience from TomTom are part of this. We got a long way to go, but we've come some distance already in promoting architecture, and we're convinced it delivers value. So that's. Sorry about this. This is kind of HR. We're hiring, particularly for architects. It's from the sponsor. All right, a message from the sponsor. If this was a podcast, this is a message from the sponsor. So apologies from that, and I'll move on. All right. Then I'll talk about. Really, I've done the heart. That's it about TomTom. Give you a flavour about where TomTom is, and now back to the argument. So the argument on business value is. Okay, so you do need, there is a thing of what is architecture anyway, all right? And I'll tell you a story that I was in this really happened. It wasn't so long ago, like 2 years ago, and I was in a big meeting with heads of what we call product units, which head all of our R&D. This 27% R&D is distributed amongst product units with product scope. And there's a meeting with the product units, and we were talking about architecture, and and there was someone who had the title architect, who was in the management team of one of these product units, said, hang on, architecture, we don't do architecture, we do agile, right? Seriously, seriously. And he was an architect. And so that was where we were 2 years ago. I don't think that would happen now. But that happened. That did happen. And so we've moved on. We've moved on from that, and we had a lot of discussion in the company about what it means to do architecture and how much architecture to do. And I think where we come to, we quite like the term just enough architecture as being right, and I think I buy that. There's definitely, I don't know if you've heard the term air sandwich, which is something that can happen with strategy or architecture, where you have the architecture, you have what people do, and a gap in between. In other words, they're completely unrelated, right? And so if you have a big architecture with a big design up front, then you can get a system where there's a big set of documents, but those documents are ignored by the people who are writing the code. So we don't want that. And the other idea is that the amount of architecture you need is depends on what it is you're doing, right? And that the primary driver of how much architecture you need is actually risk, right? And so risk-driven, just enough architecture and a risk-driven approach is the kind of direction we're going. But there's no case to have zero architecture description. That's never right, all right? So that's the kind of direction we're doing. And if there's a lot of risk, then you need a bit more architecture up front, and you need spikes or whatever in your agile process to get that right. But all of this requires that the organization that you're in has an appreciation of what architecture is, which people don't unless you take the time to educate people on what architecture is and set up a house style, and supports what you do. So the big challenge, and this is really the heart of my talk, is that your main task, and my main advice to you, is to spend, if you're not already doing it, is to spend a lot of effort in promoting architecture and explaining what architecture is and explaining the business value of what architecture is. And I try to do that, I try to do it sometimes through giving examples of where things have gone wrong because the architecture wasn't done right. Okay, or wasn't done at all, quite often. Right? And so I'll give you an example from TomTom. There was a new PND coming out, and we were doing this thing of send destination to device, which we call nav cloud. So you could put it in on the go into the browser, plan your journey, and send the destination to the device, and it would work. And also that you would keep your preferences, like your favorite locations, in the cloud, and that you could set your favorite locations in a web browser, say, or in a mobile app, and it would pick them up. Basic stuff, which has been around for a couple of years now. And we had always in our PNDs that you could very quickly go to home, right? But they wanted to go at the daily traveler, and there's the idea that we realize that people are doing the same journey, but with a traffic avoiding PND, it's still, you know the way, but you might want to go a different way because of the traffic. And so we wanted to add work, right? So we had home, so let's add work. Turned out to be an enormous effort to add work, right? And it was heroic effort from many teams because it involved development in many places. And if you looked at that, you'd say, my God, those people worked hard, they made the deadline, the number of story points, the velocity in terms of story points is super great, right? But actually, it's a catastrophe because, of course, it should have been no effort whatsoever. It should have been 3 story points or something to add work alongside home, and it wasn't. It was 300 story points or whatever. I don't know. And so business value isn't pumping out more story points per sprint. Business value is what it costs. And architecture, of course, one of the biggest non-functional requirements of any, or system quality characteristics of any system is how modifiable it is. It's the one that has the biggest business benefit of all. And here we had lousy modifiability. We wanted to do a trivial modification, and it ended up being really expensive. And the important thing to do is to pick these examples in your own organization and to explain to management, actually, this was a heroic effort, yes, but it shouldn't have been a heroic effort. It should have been a trivial effort. And that's a typical example. And having these examples helps you explain. And so you've got to get your management, including product managers and product owners, to believe that architecture isn't something that engineers like to do. It's something that's really good for the business. And the irony is that architecture is all about, as you all know, or software architecture is all about non-functional requirements, that the return on investment, the likely return on investment in doing architecture is more reliable than doing feature development. There's a well-known saying in software that 20% of the features deliver 80% of the value. It's actually quite difficult to come up with a feature and then that actually gives value. And people who do websites can do this very rapidly with A/B testing. And they typically find, if you listen to the people doing A/B testing, like Booking.com, which is probably the largest A/B testing kind of house in Amsterdam by quite some way, that most of the new features don't get the result. You know, they have this luxury that they can do something in the morning, and by the afternoon they know if it's worked, if it's delivered more business value in terms of more revenue. But anything on non-functional, anything that makes it a bit faster when they click on a thing is a lot, which is a non-functional requirement, is a lot more reliable. So what I say is that actually you have to explain the business value of architecture and get people to realize that the business value is actually greater than features. And so that doesn't lose out to features. And you have the right proportion of kind of architecture improvement compared to feature addition. Okay. Then I get to competencies. So competencies that I develop myself, and I think I would advise you to develop, and it just helped me to kind of is helping me to sell and to get Harold turned around and to see people like Harold, the politically powerful people, to see what's important. So Charlie Munger, I don't know if you know. Anybody know who Charlie Munger is? No. Anybody heard of Berkshire Hathaway? Right, Berkshire Hathaway is you can buy shares in Berkshire Hathaway, right? Berkshire Hathaway is an unusual company in that it didn't split its shares. You know, when you have shares, they tend to be about $20, right, a share. And when the share price goes up to $100, they kind of split the stock. The Berkshire Hathaway, I just looked this morning out of interest, and I was shocked myself, $270,000 a share, right? One share. Right? So your minimum increment, you can buy one share for $270,000, or you can buy two shares. Those shares started off one day at $20, right? I should have bought those shares at that time. You probably heard of the guy, Charlie Munger is part of a two-person team. You probably heard of Warren Buffett, right? Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger is the lesser-known person in the Warren Buffett team, but a super smart guy. And I like this quote. In my whole life, I've never known no wise people who didn't read all the time, and I encourage you. I try and read all the time. I enjoy reading all the time. I read a book, by the way, on business architecture as a result of giving this talk. I thought I'd better know a thing or two about it. It was very good. I thought practical guide. So I'm more knowledgeable on business architecture. I do believe in business architecture as the future now. I believe in that. So the purpose of this slide is say you really need to. I think if you're a business architect, you're going to understand the business. That's the essence of business architecture, right? But if you're a software architect, you need to understand the business too, right? And so understanding the business and the environment and being worldly wise, which comes from being well-read, is an advantage in getting your organization to follow you. I've got 3 slides on this, I think. 4 slides. And the other one is influence. You do need to develop your influence skills. I'm not a natural influencer. I have had to work hard at being an influencer. I used to be, you've probably heard the joke, when I was young, I was the, you heard the, how do you tell an extrovert computer scientist? It's a person who looks at the other person's shoes. And I was kind of, I was that extrovert who looked at the other person's shoes. And I've had to learn to develop my influencing skills. I'm also a kind of person who's very task-oriented and I like to get my head into things. And I think it's a waste of time if I'm just spending time with people. But that's such a big mistake, right? That's such a big mistake. Relationships in organizations are absolutely key. When I was at Nokia, they were very good. It was a massive organization I went into, and they said they had this Finnish term, he's listened to. And the person who is listened to, you had to know who that person was, because if you wanted to influence the organization, you had to influence the person who's listened to. And it wasn't necessarily the person with positional authority. Often it was, but there were people who were listened to, because Finnish culture has this anti-elitist, anti-hierarchy kind of thing. And I quite liked it. I quite liked that bit. You have to build your own reputation. Your reputation is key. Right? Your reputation of being reliable, level, and right. All right? And you can't be right all the time because you have to make judgments about the future, and no one can be right all the time. But you can be more right than most people by doing it, by being diligent, by being fact-based, and acting like you have skin in the game. I prefer the thing of you have skin in the game rather than acting like you own the company. I think that's it. So I work hard at these days. I don't think it's a waste of time if I'm chatting to people, building up a relationship. You do need. I'm not a national networker. I think I'd rather put red hot needles in my eyes than go to a networking event. But but the relationships are really important, and you need to work on that. The other thing I see all the time, and I do it myself, is I work so hard at knowing all this stuff, and I want to show it off, right? That I know all this stuff. But I know that's wrong, right? Your job is to summarize, and super summarize, and present that contextually to the people who are in the audience, and particularly the powerful, the higher management. You need to think what they can understand and express that. And I see architects or technical people all the time in IT and in R&D, explaining something, and I'm observing on the side, and I do it myself, right? But I work hard at not doing it. Even then, I do it, right? I overwhelm the capacity of the listener by trying to explain too much, right? And so, don't do that. Don't ever use gobbledygook. Don't ever use TLAs, three-letter acronyms, without explaining what they are. Keep it simple, use plain English, don't use Dilbert buzzwords. People who know me know that I react negatively to those. So that's my advice. Being able to reduce something to few words that are clear to anybody is very painful, very effortful to do, but worth every penny. And finally, it's learn to write well, right? I think that I've heard this saying that mastery is an asymptote. You can pass a French exam and say that you've done that, and that's a milestone you've achieved. But you can never be so good at speaking French, that you don't need to get better. And so it's an asymptote, speaking French. And so I work hard at all my life. I didn't have the kind of education that taught me to write well. But I recognized at some early stage, actually through having to write API documentation, right, which I did for 6 months, and I had someone who'd written a book coaching me. And since then, my writing is a bit awkward. It wasn't terrible, but it was a bit awkward by then, and I got better, and I worked at it, and I continue to work hard at it, and it's an impossible task. I quite like this book. I've read some books on writing that tell you do's and don'ts, and what I like about this book, and Steven Pinker's an author, it's worth reading for other things. He kind of, there's some other books like the Blank Slate about human nature and stuff that he's written. He's quite a well-respected academic. And but this book on writing is I like particularly because it explains why writing is so insanely difficult, right? And for the rules that he gives, what the reasons are for those rules. So there's a rationale. And you don't see that. You say it's better not to do this or that, and they don't say why. And the explanation is a psychological thing, and in the mechanics of the psychology. Because if you think what you're doing, we don't understand consciousness at all, right? And I have a kind of neural net in my head with ideas arranged in a complex network, associations, they think, fashion. But it's unique. It's a unique set. And then I write something down, and then someone reads it. Well, actually, they're going to have a completely different one. And worse than that, if the document's to be read by many people, which hopefully it should be, they're all going to have their own things. And somehow you've got to serialize it and make it sensible to people come up. And that's insanely difficult, but it's worth working at. So yeah, a warning about this book is quite technical in places. I mean, you don't need to understand it all, I don't think, to get value from it. I certainly didn't. So, but I warmly recommend it as a kind of book. Even if it says, I never realized why writing is so difficult, you will realize it if you read this. So, my summary. Summary, the purpose of this talk in the end, look, architecture delivers great bang for buck. We all believe that, we're all architects, right? And so I'm preaching to the converted. The challenge is that if you want to deliver great bang, you've got to be working in an organization that supports you in this idea and recognizes architecture. And I think that extends to higher management, the politically powerful. I'd also say it extends to the people coding, because you're going to get an air sandwich if the people coding don't have an appreciation of what it means to do good architecture. I think things like just enough architecture and risk-driven architecture and having an idea of what, and training for sure of good architects is part of it. But the central idea of this is don't underestimate the effort in explaining and educating the rest of the organization, and that this requires certain competencies that I work on, and I strongly recommend that you work on in a spirit of lifelong learning. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions. I hope I don't get into trouble from Harold from telling you what he's said to me. Yeah.
I'd like to have your opinion about emergent architecture, because you're talking about the centuries.
Yeah.
And that still suggests that ideas come from top to bottom.
Yeah, so whether it's strategy or architecture, I think it's, in my head I have 50-50 between emergent and deliberate.
You sometimes said that it's more process than thinking.
Oh yeah, so I'm not a believer. I'm a believer in thinking up front and doing as much as you can up front, and that's a deliberate architecture. And I believe the same on strategy as well, right? But I don't believe that you can ever do a perfect job there, that when you try that something unexpected will emerge from underneath. You know, there's a famous story about it's a strategy thing. This thing, I think they went to America to sell superbikes, and they didn't have much money, and so they were kind of a low-thing operation. To save costs, they bought over 50cc mopeds. So they didn't have to spend money on taxis and things getting around, or buy cars. And they were going around trying to sell these superbikes. This is Honda, and people saw them on these mopeds, and they said, I'm not sure about the superbikes, but these mopeds look pretty good, you know. And in the end, the emergent strategy was to sell the mopeds, which was turned out to be an entry into selling superbikes, and the rest is history, right? There's only Harley Davidson remaining. in terms of the US bike industry. So
sometimes known as serendipity, right?
yeah, so
it's
I'm totally with you. It's serendipity, but what happens is, but I'd say that I believe in learning from mistakes, and when you look at mistakes, sometimes there are avoidable architecture mistakes, right? And we have them at TomTom. We had it with our sports watch. You know, there was a case where we had the sports watch, and it collects data, and the data needs to be processed, and someone did that processing in a PC application, right? And that's not emergent architecture, that's just not thinking about it, because it's clear you're going to have to do that in a mobile app, and you're not going to do that processing in a mobile app. The mobile phone can't do it. It should have been done in the server in the first place. And so if someone had done an architecture of a product system and opened it up to scrutiny, you would have never gone that way, and you would have never developed that code that very expensively had to be adjusted and moved to the server. So I'd say I see example after example after example of insufficient design up front, but not to imagine that you can do everything up front. I'm with you there. So it's about, and it depends what you're doing, you know. And sometimes you kind of know, well, this is uncertain, so you do some development to reduce the uncertainty and to find out. So lean manufacturing type. Yeah.
I was also thinking about the role of an architect, because it could be to acquire this knowledge, which sometimes comes from bottom up. So it's not just the lack of maybe upfront design, which I agree with. It's also not noticing that good ideas are arising here and there.
Yeah, so that's why you have to keep the engagement between the architect and a coding architect works, but the scope is limited. If you're doing system architecture, you can't be a coding architect.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a concern, and it's not that. Yeah. But the reality is, there's too many of our systems that don't have any kind of description, and that's inefficient. No more questions. Yeah, please.
Yes, I have a question. In your opinion, where does architecture start and where does it end? You could argue maybe at the top it already starts at deciding whether you're going to make a new app or you add the functionality in an existing app, and it can go all the way down into the low-level lines of your actual software code.
Yeah, so I would say I would tend to think first in terms of a system, right? And that you know, so I'd say something at your architecture, number one in my list perhaps of architecture description would be a context diagram which says what is the system of interest, right? And of course the system can be big and have subsystems, and so you can apply it in a fractal sense, right? And at some level that you arbitrarily call it design rather than architecture, I don't know, all right? But I would say where you have large systems with a lot of people working on it, at the very least you need a context diagram that defines that system and the interfaces to that system, to its environment. And I'd say there's no excuse ever not to have that. That's probably too many double negatives, but you always need that, right? And so there should be an idea that there's a system, and then you should then talk about the quality attributes, the quality goals of that system, I would say. So I'm talking more system architecture, and I would say that if you're working on a system or creating a system, as we have done, without knowing what the system boundaries are and what the interfaces are, and you don't know what the quality goals are, which relate to the business needs, right? Then all hope is lost. Right? It will go wrong for sure, right? And then there are design choices made by team leads or Scrum teams that need to be consistent with that, but they can't, you know, I'm talking about systems that have multiple Scrum teams typically, right? And then I would say you do need to have building blocks, decomposition. Sometimes you need a domain model to help reason about the system. But yeah, I'm talking system architecture, and too often it's not done. Right? It's not done, and we're trying to change that at TomTom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe Tom Peters says it used to be ready, aim, fire, then it became aim, fire, now it's fire, fire, fire.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people working that way, in that feature and function that they can sell or they can bring to the customer is the most important is speed. And how do you see an architect working in that space? How do you do that?
So I'd argue that that you go faster if you have, so modifiability, right, means going faster. So if you have a modular system, then you can, with that system, you can go faster and cheaper, right, to add those features. And if you don't have an architecture, you tend to grind to a halt. So it's a simple metaphor I use. This is one of my metaphors I use to try and sell architecture. It's like a restaurant making meals, right? That you should be making meals, because if you're not making meals, you're not going fast, right? So meals are features, right? In the metaphor. But if you do that without cleaning the kitchen, you eventually grind to a halt, right? And so you do need to stop at some time and think, you know, let's have a clean kitchen here and sort it out. And so I've got Harold saying, clean the kitchen. You know, he's even using that metaphor. The metaphors are dangerous. You know, you've got to be careful with metaphors because they can go too far. But I would say, and even before I was really working, there's a community of us at TomTom who are trying to figure out what are the right standards of architecture, and you know, it's where the just enough architecture and risk-driven architecture comes from. But even before that, I would write a spec, a concept. You know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago when I was coding, it would take me a day to write the concept spec, open it up to scrutiny, and then come up with the design choices and open them up to scrutiny. So design choices and rationales always saves you money, right? Because just writing down those design choices, being explicit about your design choice, we wrote a huge system to edit our maps in ActionScript. Where was the design choice? Where was the rationale? If you had the rationale, maybe there was a rationale for using ActionScript at that time. But at least you'd be able to go back and learn from it and say, this is the reasons I did it. Where was my reasoning flawed, right? And so I'd say it's always going to be faster and better to write down your design choices, to say, and you've got to be wrong sometime, right? But you'll be wrong less often. You'll be seen as lucky, right? And you'll go faster and cheaper, and you'll get what the business wants. You'll get more features.
I like your kitchen metaphor, because in cooking there's also a lot of just enough anticipation.
Right.
So, and that's also important in architecture. In SAFE they use the architecture runway metaphor. You know, you have to anticipate the types of airplanes coming in so that your runway can be extended or strengthened in time.
Right.
Or that heavy plane coming in.
Yes.
In cooking it's the same way.
Yeah.
You know you're going to need that. You know,
Yeah. You know you're going to get a rush hour. Yeah.
That means that, okay, the dough has to be ready by that time, and that means that if I want to, you know, serve that customer, build that feature,
Yeah.
then I have to start even the previous day making the dough.
Yeah. Okay, I'll probably used up my time. Thank you very much.